Welcome. My name is Clif Peterson, and we're here representing the Certified Horsemanship Association at Miracle Ranch, Port Orchard, Washington, at the regional CHA conference. And today I'm going to be giving a demonstration and example of a double diamond hitch on a pack saddle. Underneath this tarp here, I've got a sawbuck pack saddle on my trusty barrel horse Greenie here, who is not going to be too skittish during this process. I got panniers underneath here and two side panniers and a top pannier, and then this here is going to be my top tarp. Just kind of some purpose behind this. Before I get started, I've got my lash rope all set up here, and you might be thinking, like, why don't we just have the panniers by themselves or the top pack by themselves? And one of the things that I really like to do is to make this entire setup, the pad and the saddle and the panniers and the top pack, all as much as part of the horse as I possibly can. So what I don't want is for any parts of this pack system to be moving without the horse. And so it's just like a rider and a horse. You want the thing to be balanced, and you want it to be centered, and you want it to be in sync with the horse. Because if I'm going to go down the pack trail for 10 miles or 15 miles or 20 miles, the purpose of the double diamond hitch, or any hitch that you're going to tie on a horse, really is to bring everything into sync with the horse. So when that horse is moving down the trail at a walk or at a trot, that pack stays with them. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've got my lash rope kind of set up here. And this is a lash cinch. It's got a hook on one side. One of the things you might note is this hook you want to be facing backwards, and so that's one of the things you got to consider when you don't have a rider on a horse is what can get snagged on a tree branch or brush or whatnot as the horse moves down the trail. So I've got that orientated backwards. I've got the loop tied to the ring side of my lash cinch and then fed through there. So I've got a loop sticking out this side about as long as I need it to go around the whole horse here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my lash cinch underneath the horse here. I'm going to take the loop end of this rope and make sure it's nice and organized, and I'm just going to lay this up over my top tarp here, like so. I'll come over here and I'm going to put this looped in on the hook side of my lash cinch, just like this. And once I have that set there, I'm going to come back to this side and I'm going to pull the slack out of this rope through that hook side there. And one of the things I want to make note of here is that I'm centering this lash cinch underneath the horse. So the hook is centered underneath the pack on that side, and the D-ring here is centered underneath the pack on this side of the horse here. I might not take a lot of slack or tension out of this rope. I want it to be fairly snug, but as you see, as we progress through this hitch, you don't need to start with this super tight, because the way this diamond hitch works is when the rest of the rope runs around this top pack here to kind of suck everything in against the horse, it's going to take up a lot of this slack here. The first thing I'm going to do after I get this all centered where I want it is I'm just going to throw a little half hitch in here, which is kind of a slip knot that I can pull out of there later if I want to, or in this case I'm going to go ahead and throw a couple half hitches over the top of that. If you want to see that again, what I did here is where that rope runs through that D-ring, I'm going to take my rope, fish it around the body of the same piece of rope there with that loop, and I'm going to pull that out so I have a loop hanging out here. Now I don't want a huge loop that's going to catch on every piece of tree branch and brush along the trail, so I'm going to shorten that up just a little bit and throw a couple half hitches on there, which are going to kind of lock that in and allow me to use the other end of this rope here. All right. So now at this point you can kind of see we've got some tails hanging out here on either side of my top tarp, and you want to kind of make this as neat of a package as possible for moving down the trail. I'm going to go ahead and at this point start tucking things in here to my pack to keep this as secure as possible, especially if I have things in here that I want to keep dry. I might have my sleeping bags and whatnot, anything that I'm using for my camp cleaned up as best as possible. The next step on this hitch here is that I'm gonna create some twists right here on either side. So you can imagine just having a vision of what this is gonna look like when it's done. This is gonna have 2 diamonds. This is the double diamond hitch. So there's gonna be a diamond here and there's gonna be a diamond on the other side of the pack. And so I wanna take my strands of my rope here and I'm gonna go left over right, and then left over right again, and left over right again. And I'm gonna leave that there set up just like I want it. And I'm gonna take the rest of my rope here, the tail of my rope, and I'm gonna feed it through this side of my diamond here. Make sure that comes around the front of my pack right there. And I usually, if there's some soft material in my pannier here, you can kind of pack that rope into that spot there. And then this is gonna come around the front of my pack here. And when I get to this side over here, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna make my other diamond over here. And I can, because I left a little slack in this rope, I can make some adjustments to it as I go. I'll tuck this tarp in here again. I wanna make sure as I go, I'm making this as neat as possible. So as it tightens down on this pack, I don't have to fight with it later. Same thing here on this side. I'm gonna go follow the same pattern here so it doesn't untwist my rope on the other side. So left over right here, make my diamond. Make sure I like that. If it feels like I've got too much slack in there or the material in my pack's a little soft, I can always throw some extra twists in there to take up some of that slack. So I'm gonna take my tail of my rope again and feed it through my diamond here. Run it around the front of my pack down here. Now at this point you can just run the rope straight underneath your pack. Some guys will tie it off here and kind of have half and half. For this example today, I'm just gonna run it straight underneath my pack here and up the other side. So you see I'm running up the very middle of my pannier again back here. I don't want it to slip underneath the pack towards the horse. I don't want it to slip off out here. So I'm gonna make sure it's kind of sitting right in the middle of my pannier here to kind of pull everything in. I'm gonna run the tail of my rope through the other side of my diamond there, and I can kind of pull that up. I'm gonna run this around the back of my horse here. I'm just glad she doesn't kick. Run the slack of my rope through the other side of this diamond here. If you look at it from right over here, you can see the diamond shape here that we've created, and that's what gives this hitch its name. So I'm gonna take the tail of my rope here and I'm gonna run it through. One of the things you might think about is if you do get into a wreck on the trail, which if anybody has done any packing for any length of time, even if it was 5 minutes, you probably had some kind of wreck or another. How am I gonna get all this off this animal if things start to turn south? And so that's why I like to use these slip knots and then put a half hitch on them to kind of hold them. So then I'm not feeding that rope all the way through that D every time. So what I might do here is feed this through and then tie a slip knot on there. Then when I pull this, it comes all the way out of the D-ring like that. And I can keep it from getting pulled loose on the trail just by throwing a couple half hitches on top of that loop. But as you can see there, I'm not feeding the entire, I've got about probably 10, 12, 15 feet of rope left here, lash rope that I don't want to feed all the way through that D-ring. And at this point, what I'm gonna do is kind of evaluate what my pack looks like and where it looks like there might be some bulges, or I might have pushed some stuff around in my pack that doesn't look like it's nice and centered, or where I might have some of my top tarps sticking out that might get snagged on a branch or whatnot. And you can tighten this thing up 2 or 3 times if you need to and kind of make adjustments. You can kind of see the diamonds kind of pulled to the back of this horse just a little bit, and I've kind of got a bulge here and a little loose tarp going on here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the beginning of my hitch, and I can pull slack out of this. And as I pull slack out of it, I can kind of move this rope around, this lash rope around, and tuck my continue to tuck my top tarp in there wherever I feel like it needs to be cleaned up. And so I'm just gonna follow that same pattern around here and make sure that every little bit of tarp and all the little pieces of my pack are as compact and tight against this horse as possible. And as I'm doing this, you're creating all kinds of tension on this cinch here on the bottom of the horse. And so as I talked about at the beginning of this educational video here, is that you want to tighten your entire pack down onto the horse to make it as one with the horse as possible, so that the pack's not moving independently from the horse. Just like you would want a rider to be balanced and in sync with the movements of the horse. And you're working with a lot of dead weight here, so the more that you can get this thing tightened down and in sync with the movements in the body of the horse, the better you're off you're gonna be, especially for the long duration of the trail. I'm gonna go ahead and finish tightening this up, coming around the back here. And as you can see here, we probably got, what is that? At least 24 inches of slack pulled out on our first tightening. Now, if you remember, I've got my slip knot here, which I can pull that slip knot loose and then retie it. And this time I'm gonna go ahead and snug her up. And I feel pretty good about this pack. I don't have a lot of weight in here. So I'm at a point right now where I feel pretty good about heading down the trail for a ways. And what I would do is probably head down the trail, and maybe after a half mile or maybe a mile or so, I might think about taking a look back and checking on my pack here and see how it's riding. But this gives me a pretty good start for my pack. One thing that you probably be aware of when you're working with a pack saddle and tying hitches like this is when you have all this extra rope hanging down, it's not going to hurt to go ahead and just make some nice coils out of it and go ahead and lay it up on your pack while you're working around the horse here, or even tie it, hang it up here on the back of your horse or whatnot, or you can just tuck it into part of your hitch here. And that way, if your horse goes to dancing around, they're not going to get a leg caught around that rope and get tangled up in that. And so there's some safety precautions that you want to take as you're working with a horse. I've had wrecks on a pack horse when I was still at the barn putting the pack on a horse, and things went sideways and that horse wasn't comfortable with it. And so especially if you're just getting into this and trying things out, I think this is really good for all horses. But when you are in that process of introducing this new thing to a horse, it's going to be some new feeling to them. They're going to have this rigging on the back of them, a britchin hanging off here, and it's going to feel different. That dead weight's going to feel different, and you might have things inside your pack that make a little noise, some pots and pans or bags of Doritos or whatever it is. All of those things are things to consider as far as safety goes when you're working with a horse like this, and especially with a lot of gear that can get tangled up and make them uncomfortable. And when you're working with ropes and multiple cinches and lots of straps on your horse and stuff like that, it's easy to get away with that stuff when you're working with a good mare like old Greenie here. Now with my extra rope here, I'm gonna want this to be accessible, but I'm not gonna want it to fall out on the trail. So what I might do is I'll go ahead and, this is how I store all my ropes, but I just make it a nice clean loops. I'm gonna wrap it around a few times. I'm gonna stick my tail through there and create like a hitch around the top of that loop. With enough slack here, I wanna make sure I tuck it up underneath my pack so it's not getting caught on anything. And I might just tuck this in here underneath the back of my rope where I know no branches are gonna snag it and whatnot. And if I do need to get this pack loose really quick, I can come back here and I can grab this slack of my rope and pull it out and then go to taking all this apart. Some guys will use a bit of a breakaway, little piece of baling twine or something like that. I've seen guys go ahead and just tie it onto the back of the pack back here somewhere. I don't necessarily like this little tail hanging down here, so I might clean that up and stuff that in there. Once we end up at camp, and we roll into camp with our pack string. We might tie them up to our, set up our high line real quick, or tie them all the trees is typically what we do. This horse might have been packing this for 10, 12, 15 miles or so, and is pretty tired. And so first thing I'm going to do is look after my animals, make sure I get this pack off of them. So if I'm going to take this double diamond off of my horse here, I can just come back here where I tucked my rope in, didn't get her tangled on any branches or sagebrush or whatnot. And because I didn't loop this through the D-ring, I can go ahead and just leave this section tied up here. Makes it a little bit easier to feed it back through, and I can pull this slip knot out of here. That comes right out of the D-ring just like that, and I can just walk this back through my diamond hitch off of the horse here, pull it out of the diamond on this side, keeping my rope all rolled up so my horse at this point, after 15 miles of trail, is probably not going to be too fidgety. But I'll walk that through my diamond there. I've got one more slip knot with a couple half hitches on it, and kind of loosen that up there. And then I can disconnect my hook from my lash cinch there. And I'll pull that lash cinch out. I'll lay it on my horse's neck because she's a good horse there, and then you can see this is what the rest of the pack looks like here. We'll pull my top tarp off. And you can see we got a top pack here. And this top pack has got straps that are tied onto the side panniers here. If we just had this without that top tarp and double diamond, as we were going down the trail, all of this could shift around quite a bit and bounce and dance. All these straps can get hung up on branches and whatnot. You might have seen some of these tails hanging down. A lot of times I'll tuck all this stuff up in here before I put my top tarp on there, and that way it'll mitigate that trouble when you're moving down the trail. That's your double diamond hitch. And again, my name's Clif Peterson, here with the Certified Horsemanship Association at the beautiful Miracle Ranch on this beautiful day with all this liquid sunshine. You're not horsepacking unless you're horsepacking in the rain, in my opinion. So we appreciate you watching this educational video, and come back again.